Join Screamstream November 30th through December 5th for a deep dish slice of pizza in horror, featuring an interview with Famous Monsters Pizza, horror-inspired pizza recipes from Geeks Who Eat, a slice watch party, and a discussion of the top pizza scenes in horror. Dig in!
Welcome, guys, to another episode of Screamstream. Tonight, we start our first in the 4 parts of our series of episodes where we dive into full moon features, history, break it down by eras, and we talk about each era, those films, the hits, the stinkers, the different labels, some behind-the-scenes stuff, and much, much more. We'll go around here and introduce each other, Brandy, and we're going to talk about our experiences with the Full Moon franchise. We have Dustin with us tonight, who is one of the busiest people I think I see on my Facebook often, always helping producing and developing indie films. Check out some of his content on Facebook, Adam, awesome cool dude, and our in-house, my go-to guy for all things Full Moon, because I don't know, it was at least 10 years ago, I contacted him about helping with a couple of pieces I was writing on a previous website, and he was able to help me find out what films were connecting with what other films, what characters were shared, what names and references and stuff were established and all that. So thank you especially for joining us tonight.
Sure, definitely.
And yeah, so I guess we'll just go around. Brandy, what is your experience with the Full Moon film franchise?
Well, like we were talking about earlier, the movies kind of, I felt like they were kind of like low budget in the quality. They're really interesting. I felt like there was a lot of over the top acting, which kind of made it, because one of them I watched, I didn't really like the storyline, but the way that they acted was really funny, and that kind of kept me entertained. I don't know.
So have you? Yeah. So have you previously watched any of these films that were, especially on this first era of list, which is the Paramount era, or as Dustin called, the era where they had funding?
I think I had, and I forget which ones, but it was a while ago.
Probably
when I went through and was watching stuff, I was watching stuff that I hadn't heard of before at all.
Yeah. So to say the least, you're just now kind of scratching the surface on the studio's film work and all that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had a love of Full Moon since the early or late 90s, early 2000s. What really caught me and at that point I never turned back was actually watching William Shatner's Full Moon Fright Night on Sci-Fi in the early 2000s. Only lasted one season, but that's what got me, to discover Hideous, and forgot what other ones they had on there. They had Drunken Heads, I believe, tons of other ones. And then I went down the rabbit hole and obviously watched Puppet Master Subspecies. I love and still love that series. And yeah, there's probably way more that I haven't seen than I have, but definitely wanting to cross them all off the list. And now that I have their new app, hopefully I can make a dent in that. So. And Dustin, why don't you tell us your history and connection to the Full Moon landscape?
So, growing up as a kid, I was always I grew up with a mother who loved horror, so we watched as much horror, went to the theater all the time, saw scary movies, rented them as often as we could once, the video stores started popping up, because I'm just that old. So, I was familiar with the name. I to this day, I'm still a credit reader. I sit and I read the credits. I want to know everyone who, did everything. So, even as a producer today, one of my favorite things is the credits at the end. So I would sit and I'd read everything, and I'd write names down. And, Charles Bam was the name that kind of stuck with me, because he made a lot of stuff that I loved watching as a kid, like movies and, Reanimator and that kind of stuff. So, then I saw that he had produced a new movie, Puppet Master, very first Puppet Master. When it came out, I was actually at my local video store, which was in a grocery store at the time, and I got the first Puppet Master the very first day it came out. Took it home, watched it, fell in love with it, and just sort of became obsessed ever since. I stalked the store all the time, constantly, to get the flyers and the magazines to see when the new stuff was coming out. Became a fan club member the moment that became a thing. I still have my actual fan club card from back in like 91, 92-ish, something like that. So, and just stuck with it ever since. So,
That's awesome. And we actually have, I forgot, he's just now trying to get in here. We have another person joining us. It's Waylon Bacon. He is back to join us for this episode of Scream Stream. Hey, Waylon.
Hey, man.
What's up?
Not much. Sitting here finishing dinner, and I looked at my girlfriend and I was like, wait a minute. That's 3 hours, which means now, not in an hour. Oh, God. So if I look a little sweaty, it's because I just ate a bunch of Mexican food. And it's a little stuffy in here because we're on fire, so.
Right, yeah. Ugh. Yeah. Well, yeah, so we just got done actually going around the table here, and we're kind of talking about our personal connection to the Full Moon films and how long we've been fans and stuff like that. So perfect time to come and join. So you're on deck. So.
Let me get my plate set up here. See if they want to stand straight. Okay. So my own personal recollections of Full Moon.
Mm-hmm. Just, like how long you've been a fan, how you first got into the various franchise, film franchises they have and stuff like that.
I'm pretty sure, I don't remember exactly, but my theory is that I saw Puppet Master at the video store and just kind of locked in because those looked really cool. And then, discovered it was Full Moon Pictures, and there was a blank spot there. But I know probably within the year, my father and I would go rent movies every Friday night at the video store, and we'd always end up renting the Full Moon movies because they had this kind of cool, lurid box art, and they were really smart. I thought about making you feel like you were part of, like they were bigger than they were, because they always had those coming soon and the featurettes at the end of the tape, which was cool because it was before DVD. And so you'd sit there and get really excited, and they had recurring people too. Like, who was it that played Dollman and Trancers?
Thomerson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so they'd have the same people like showing up in the movies over and over again, like stock players.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah. And again, just to kind of catch you up, Waylon, we're going over the years 1989 through 1995, which are the Paramount era. So before we jump into talking about this slate of films, this era of films, we have a special interview here that we'll be playing, and we'll do that now.
All right.
And the interview is yet to be shot or filmed or even decided upon who we're going to try to bring in. So
I had a feeling, yeah.
So we're going to do that, like, hopefully do that sometime next week and stuff. So.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
And that was that. Thank you, Justin, for helping us get that set up and making that come to fruition. And look forward to talking to other various Full Moon alumni as we continue on these next 3 episodes. So again, thank you for that. Much appreciated. And yeah, so I guess let's just dive into this masterful thing. So Charles previously had Empire Pictures, right? Pictures.
Yeah, Empire International, Empire Pictures. Yeah.
And under that, he produced Trancers, right? That was one under Empire, right?
Yes, Trancers one.
Yeah. And then, so okay, I was trying to look this up to you previously, just because I never knew what made the switch from Empire to Full Moon. What caused that switch to happen?
Kind of a case of getting a little too big for the britches to a degree. Kind of, and that's a similar situation with what happened with the Paramount era at Full Moon. There was the growth of what was happening became so immense that things eventually sort of caved in on itself. And a lot of the holdings that were going on with the Empire Studios era of content, the bank came in and basically just collected everything up. A couple, movies sort of went into limbo, sat for a while. They became owned by the bank, credit liaison, and he pretty much had to just pack up and move out of move stakes out of Italy, where most of the Empire International films had been shot were in Italy. So kind of whereas Full Moon would later sort of pioneer Romania, they were sort of pioneering Italy for America. So they had to come over here, and he just decided to, sort of reboot the whole thing and come up with a whole new label. So, and Puppet Master is something that had sort of been, in the back of mind for a while. So it just sort of became the first title.
Yeah,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
So I thought, didn't Puppet Master come about because one of the bands, I'm pretty sure Charles' band, had a hand in producing Dolls, the Stuart Gordon film. And from what I recall, that movie was so successful. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, these killer dolls are huge right now. We got to do more killer doll films.
Yeah, Charles Band loves anything that's killer dolls or puppet related, anything that's smaller than a human, or even a little person that can kill people. Anything that's a small inanimate object that can come to life and terrorize beautiful women, he's all for. So.
Yeah, and like we mentioned earlier, looking at the slate of Full Moon films in this first era, I mean, we have Puppet Master, we have, Trancers, the majority of the Trancer sequels, actually all the Trancer sequels were within this era. Bad Channels.
When Empire shut down, it was my understanding that Trancers was the only property that the sequel rights were actually retained to for whatever reason, oddly of everything. So.
That's strange. And then we also got the Subspecies franchise, Dynamic Toys. Then we have the crossover. We have Dollman,
Demonic Toys.
Yeah.
Puppet Master versus Demonic Toys.
And because you curated these awesome eras for us, Justin, and to me, one of the biggest, most interesting. Well, actually, two of the biggest things was Subspecies was shot just after the fall of communism. I thought it was a really interesting fact, and it probably would be. I mean, it might not be, but I feel like it's probably going to be one of the first films shot in. What was it? It was shot in Romania.
Yes, I believe. Yeah. It was shot just after the fall of Ceausescu. The wall had just come down, the Berlin Wall, and things were just very tense and chaotic there. And it was it was literally like, apparently like shooting in a third world country, It was just, everything was nuts.
Yeah.
A lot of the cast and crew couldn't be very contained there. They were drinking each night and, buying $1 bottles of wine and just kind of partying it up and just being really difficult and unmanageable. But
can't blame
it was
them.
apparently very tense, like rough thing to live through though, because it was the first American production there.
Yeah. Okay.
At that point.
That's really interesting. And yeah, so I believe, Waylon, aren't you a pretty big fan of the Subspecies films?
I love them. Yeah, and what's funny is I tried rewatching them somewhat recently, last couple of years, and it didn't grab me the way it did when I was a kid. But I still respected it mostly because I thought the mythology was so cool.
Mm-hmm.
That they actually kind of took the vampire mythology and then just took a weird left field with it. And I've always been a firm believer that the Nosferatu style looking vampire is the superior vampire. Like I groan whenever I see sort of the Lugosi style, because I only think Lugosi, maybe Langella did it well. But so yeah, I thought the vampire designs in Subspecies was freaking brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm surprised does anyone know? Because they made Subspecies toys. Did they ever make the cool little like gnome creatures that they have? Remember they had this cool like stop motion gnome creatures that were like carting around the bloodstones.
They never really had real figures of the subspecies themselves, unfortunately. It was probably one of many, many toys that were planned and never actually happened, though, because there were many attempts at startups for toys and figures and things that didn't really get off the ground, so.
Yeah, because when Puppet Master figures came around, I was like long past my full moon phase. But at the time, I wanted Puppet Master toys so badly, I made my own. Like I had a Pee Wee Herman doll, and I managed to make a hat, and I turned him into Blade by painting his face. I've since fixed him, but so yeah, when these came out, it blew my mind. I was like, "What, Puppet Master?" 7 years too late, but I still bought it.
And,
It definitely shows how much of a fan you were to go out to make your own for that.
Oh yeah.
That's dedication.
Yes.
Well, because I didn't like superheroes or anything. I just like monster movies. And so, there were no toys for me to play with outside of monster toys. All I have are my old Remco Phantom of the Opera and Frankenstein toys. So yeah, it is something. Keep up with the changing tastes. And I had the t-shirt too. There was a Full Moon fan club, and you could get a t-shirt and you'd get like a newsletter that would tell you about what films were coming out. I wish I had any of that stuff left, actually. It was all super cool.
I'm wearing my original Full Moon t-shirt as we speak.
That's the one I had. Oh my god.
That's awesome.
I have many Full Moon t-shirts, but this is the only one that I've ever actually worn. The other ones I just can't leave in the plastic. So,
I've got a Oingo Boingo farewell t-shirt that I have to stop wearing because it's starting to fray a little bit. Too sad. I was like, damn it.
Yeah, you got to keep that safe.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then the other fact that I thought was really interesting was the fact that a lot of these films in this era were shot back to back with sequels. We had, let's see, we had Trancers 4 and 5 were shot back to back. Oblivion 1 and 2 were shot back to back. Bloodstone and Bloodlust 2 and 3 of the Subspecies films were shot back to back, which makes sense though, because I mean, if they're on location and they have the budget, why not knock 2 out? You have the primary cast there, especially with the Subspecies films. There's 2, 3 main cast members. So, and Ted kind of, as the director and stuff, but yeah, and then we have some other interesting things I think that happened. We had the formation of a couple different, I guess, sub-labels is what you'd call them.
Yeah, I call them like little sister labels that would specialize in similar but slightly different content, but there was still sort of fantasy horror themes sometimes.
Right, and that was Moonbeam Entertainment. That was primarily like a kid family friendly label.
Yeah, I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Very popularized with the pre-hysteria films.
Yeah.
So, fighting off the Jurassic Park craze, because every kid had dinosaurs.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember, and I don't think I ever watched those, but I remember watching Beanstalk with
Mhm.
Margot.
Margot Kidder.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Richard Hall.
Mhm. I haven't seen it since I was a kid. I'd love to watch it again because I remember loving it when I was younger. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they did that label. They did Torchlight, which was that more of a fantasy,
Torchlight was
or is it the
sci-fi fantasy erotica.
yeah.
Very, very erotically slanted. Lots of nudity.
Mhm.
Lots of nudity and sex.
They have a lot of soft mid '90s lighting. You put like a little pink gel in the light, so
Absolutely. There's a lot of Vaseline on the lens. Everything looks very smoky and salacious for 3 o'clock in the morning Skinamax viewing.
Real nasty.
Right. So yeah, I mean, yeah, there's so much going on in this 6-year span. Do you think that, because when the titles that people most connect Full Moon with are Subspecies, like Puppet Master, all the ones we just mentioned, a lot of them are coming out in this first era. Do you think that they lost steam going out of this Paramount era? And actually, and I was wanting to talk to you more about this, Dustin, because at what point was this break from Paramount? I mean, I'm assuming it was 95, but what just kind of detail what happened there, and obviously, how Paramount retained the rights to the majority of the films that were released.
So there was a lot of, as time passed, Full Moon, much like Empire, they grew very fast at a very unprecedented rate for what they were doing. And the budgets were not big by Hollywood standards, but they had Paramount money and an exclusive distribution deal through Paramount. So they were, they had budgets that were in the low, $100,000. So there was money. They were flying entire casts in places and had, very detailed effects people. They had Dave Allen on a lot of stuff. He was an Academy Award nominee. But things got to a point where they had, there were so many movies being made at one time, and some finagled accounting and some movies that Paramount didn't quite know existed at points, and there was some other stuff going on that Paramount just wasn't really aware that the money was being utilized for, and the umbilical cord got cut. And with that, I mean, you have to consider that they were making movies with Paramount money, so Paramount owned them all to a degree. There had to be some kind of ownership clause in there to a degree for band, because a lot of those, there was a period in the early 2000s where Full Moon had released a box set of like Puppet Master DVDs, and Paramount issued a cease and desist order for it because they were illegal to distribute because they didn't own the rights to them. And all the rights to all of that content, I believe, expired at Full Moon in the mid-late 2000 era, and they retained all of the Full Moon specific titles. The Moonbeam titles, they actually retained the rights to until roughly maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. They specifically wanted to hold on to that content for longer for some reason.
Yeah.
Maybe because it was more kid friendly and they thought it would be more, marketable for some reason. But the funny thing is that when all of that happened, Paramount didn't do anything with that stuff anyway. They were just sort of like, well, we're done. Your stuff is in our vault. It can just sit there and collect dust and you can't do shit with it. So deal with it. And they didn't really do anything with it. They just sat on it for, 15, 20 years until all the rights expired, and then you could actually take them back legally. So,
yeah. Something else I want to talk about is because I find the behind the scenes I don't know much about it, but I know there's massive reshoots FX work on Arcade.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that was that's one I've always loved. That I don't think it was Seth Green's debut, but I know it starred Seth. Isn't Seth Green?
Seth Green. It was one of his earlier.
Yeah, that and Tricks were like his
speaking
early films. And yeah, that's one that's a really good one. And like somewhere I saw online, it was like the original FX footage of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if the whole thing was released, or if it was just clips and stuff. I can't really recall, but and yeah.
Yeah, there were with Arcade. There was the original effects version, which was all flat 2D computer effects,
Yeah.
kind of like an old Atari game. And that version did actually get VHS released in some foreign countries. Like there's a Portuguese VHS that has the original version. That's the version I believe that's been ripped the most onto YouTube and different things. I think that version is terrible. And pretty unwatchable personally. I know people that love it and think it's the superior version,
Really?
but when they made that at the time, the effects world was evolving. Lawnmower Man was coming out, Jurassic Park was looming, computer effects and especially CGI and that kind of stuff was in the early stages of birth, and they saw the final, version of that movie and just looked at the effects and they thought it was generally crap, and we're like, we can't release this. This is pretty awful. So they hired. They had a guy who worked there named Daniel Schweiger, who had done a lot of behind the scenes work. Like he used to actually do a lot of the Video Zone content. And Dan Schweiger was actually brought on as an associate producer for Arcade. He actually oversaw completely rebuilding the movie from the ground up. They recut it from frame one and redid everything. They scrapped all the music, got new score, got new songs. Hired I believe, a Canadian effects company, DHD Post Image, and actually rebuilt all the digital effects from the ground up.
Yeah.
Made it something that could, quote unquote, compete in the newer effects market. It was shot, I believe, around late 90, early 91-ish, but it didn't get released until, I believe, early 90.
Yeah.
So it was a majorly delayed. So.
Yeah. And then during this time, there's only one theatrical released film, I believe, and that was
Robo-Jocks?
No. What was it?
Shrunken Heads.
No, never mind. Okay, no, I guess that was the first one.
Because I think they thought Shrunken Heads was going to be released theatrically, but then it did. I think
there was Shrunken Heads. Yeah, Shrunken Heads is intended to be the first theatrical and the only main theatrical play it got. Kind of came out of the director Richard Elfman's pocket. He actually paid for the New York opening himself.
Gosh.
I know. Proud of that damn movie. It should be though. That's a good movie.
It is a good one.
They for whatever reason they sort of pulled out at the last minute. And there have been a lot of weird attempts at theatrical releases. Even the first Oblivion movie played some film festivals. Sometimes gets called a theatrical release, but it didn't actually play nationwide or anything though. So.
I always thought they shouldn't have even bothered because it was so cool to have these direct. Because I mean, like there was plenty of direct-to-video content you could rent back in the day, but it wasn't all good. Like the Full Moon stuff had this kind of consistent vibe to it and of near quality. And obviously, Charles Band is a big comic book guy, so it's got that sort of pop sensibility. And so it was the perfect thing. It was like going to rent the new Trancers or one of even the weird one-offs like Castle Freak. It was, for me, just as cool as going to opening night at a movie theater.
Totally, yeah. That was some of the most exciting moments for me as a kid, was going in and seeing that new Full Moon movie sitting on the shelf. I got to get this now.
Oh, and you knew you had to go whole night. You're going to watch that. I'm going to watch the special feature. And
yep.
Cool.
Sometimes I would be that nerd that would actually put it in and like fast forward the tape past the movie just to
Kids
get the
today-
videos down so I could watch that first.
Yeah, such a pain. I have some copy of Star Wars on VHS tape for a while. It was the only version that didn't have any add-ons, but you actually had to fast forward through an interview with George Lucas at the beginning of it every time you watched it.
Yep. Like you're gonna watch this whether you want to or not.
And he's got one of those voices too. It's like instant narcolepsy. You're like, ah.
Yep. Now the video zones were an interesting too because that was not something that Paramount wanted to do. It was kind of an experimental idea at the time because the idea of bonus content wasn't really something that studios wanted to buy into. So he had to really fight to get those, that extra 15, 20 minutes put on the end of each tape because, all that tape costs money.
And like something I've noticed as of late that I've noticed lately, talking about like the video zone content, I've noticed that Charles hasn't put out any videos as of this year, I don't think, or even much the past couple of years, I don't believe.
Yeah.
He used to do like the not weekly, but maybe monthly.
Yeah, the vidcast.
Vidcast, yeah, that's what it was.
Yeah, he tries to do the vidcast, but he's not very consistent with them.
Yeah. I mean,
He's kind of much too. I think he got he was selling props from the full moon films, and they caught him if they weren't actual props or something like that. Scandal a while ago.
There's always some little scandal.
He's like an old school entrepreneur. You know what I mean?
Yep. All about the showmanship and trying to, the greatest B movie snake.
Yeah.
Salesman.
Like the people that peddled mom and dad. The stories of the things they did to make that extra fun to see, like they would separate the audience, like only women will be allowed at this time and only men will be allowed at this time. It's too shocking to be seen in mixed company. Crazy stuff.
But yeah, I definitely think this is obviously it's clear, this is the golden era of Full Moon. So I guess before we wrap this thing up, let's give some final thoughts on the era and try to get we can go and plan to hopefully see you all in on the next era episode. So I guess, Justin, if you want to kick it off on your thoughts on this era of film, of the Full Moon era.
I think that, in the scope of like low budget horror and indie and stuff, people look at Full Moon nowadays and usually they think it's just like more of the goofier stuff that they're known for nowadays, like Evil Bong or Ginger Dead Man and that kind of like super, it's like the fantasy goofy elements there, but it's to the hilt. So that's what people think of nowadays more, but I think a lot of people, especially younger audiences nowadays, don't realize how important this era was, because it was a big thing for a producer of that level to have that kind of a development deal with a major Hollywood studio.
Right.
Some of these movies that would never have been, greenlit by any major studio in video store shelves. And I mean, some of these things they sold like mad. Like it might not sound like a lot, but tens of thousands of copies, sometimes upwards of 100,000 copies. So when you consider that's $100 tape, sell through didn't exist back then. There wasn't really a collector's market per se as much at the time. If you were a fan club member and wanted to buy movies, they had to get their tapes from Paramount, so you had to buy those for $60.
Yeah.
Which was a discount from Paramount. So you had to, it was a big thing, they made lots of money. They sold a lot of stuff. So I think people forget how big they really were. So, and it's an important era. I think there's a lot of good content that came out of that era. The Subspecies movies, especially Puppet Master, which is, to this day, it's still the most successful direct-to-home entertainment format franchise in existence. So,
yeah, I mean, it's definitely not only one of the, probably not only their best series, but one of the longest running horror franchises.
It is one of the longest running, yeah. They've
Yeah.
produced 12 installments to
Mhm.
date. So
Yeah.
14 if there's 14 if you count the 2 unofficial installments
Right.
versus Demonic Toys and the Littlest Reich.
Right.
So
I'll admit, I stopped after the third one. I was like, puppets killing Nazis. I don't know if anything's ever going to top that. So I didn't want my memory to be sullied by a less than stellar sequel.
they're still killing Nazis to this very day. So
Ugh. All right, Waylon. So, what are your thoughts on this opening era of the full moon history?
Yeah, it was, like you said, I think it was really important. I think growing up wanting to make films too, it was really inspiring to see that there was someone out there who was producing a lot of their own unique content. And it was sort of like witnessing what would become film culture before DVD came and did it. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't like audio commentary and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that was really inspiring, probably helped cultivate a certain obsessiveness about me. And it was just mind-blowing. It was so creative. Like these were horror films that weren't traditional horror films. You know what I mean? It was like a weird Frankenstein monster of stuff, which also kind of think informed a lot of people's sensibilities. Because you see a lot more of that sort of a thing now, where it's not just, doesn't have to be straight horror. It's kind of got a little this, little that.
Yeah.
I know it's kind of a ramble, but we'll just say for a moment in time there, it was really exciting for me. And I actually distinctly remember when it started sucking, and it was like right after Castle Freak. I think Castle Freak was actually the first one they did outside of Paramount. And I think it was the guy who did Reanimator and Jeffrey Combs. So, but I remember it was missing a certain something, and it seemed pretty quickly that the quality went downhill. Yeah.
Brandy, what are your thoughts on the few that you've seen thus far?
Well, I guess I don't have like the whole history that you guys have with this, so I'm a little bit different. But the few that I have seen, I did like them. They did feel really like homey, kind of like you said. They weren't made for like some of these weren't made for like theatrical debuts or anything. So I kind of like the idea of sitting at home and watching a scary movie or something that's gonna spook me in some way, and you get to do that in your home. Because sometimes you watch a movie and the scariness comes from being in the theater. So I kind of like how it's one of those movies you can just pop in at home and it's good. It's good for what it does.
Yeah.
Despite the low budget after Paramount.
It's almost like its own weird subgenre because there's popcorn movies, but these were like microwave popcorn movies.
Yes.
Specifically.
Yeah. I definitely think again this era holds the best gems that Full Moon has offered. Obviously, as far as a global standpoint, as far as they acknowledge these brands as Full Moon connected and stuff, and it put Charles on the map, put a lot of actors on the map, and the directors, and it was I think a very important 6 years in the horror scene, especially those years where I'd say peak years to have people going to like your mom and pop shops and renting movies, and so I think Full Moon helped the horror scene in that regard, and also I think those mom and pop shops and stuff helped Full Moon as well. And yeah, so I'm definitely excited to hopefully in a couple of weeks we'll get back in with the second era, 95 through 2004. But again, thank you guys for joining us, and we hope you guys will join us again for the next one. So thanks for being with us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
yeah, thank you.
All right, and I guess that wraps it up. We will see you guys next week on another episode of Scream Stream. And until then, I'm Patrick. That's Brandy. That's Dustin. That's Wayland. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Good.